So if you join me, I'd like to do pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Well, welcome, everybody. Good to see you again. First time seeing you in person.
Second. But last time I was out.
Yeah, I was on the street.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, so nice to see you in person, Megan. We'd like to just continue our discussion here, but as we move forward, I'd like to have some approval for the agenda. Does anybody have any comments about the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda.
Okay, we have a motion to approve.
I'll second that.
By Buckles, second by Vermont. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Thank you. I don't see anybody here for open forum, so we can move forward unless they have some angels on where
Well, we are the only ones online right now, but that doesn't, but yeah.
Okay, great. So let's move to item number 5 on our sheet here, and that's the council structure as we've been talking about. Before we get into any discussion, just want to thank Commissioner Tucker for all of his work on the research that he provided for all of us. It was very thorough. Does anybody have any comments about the findings of Commissioner Tucker? Anybody want to make any comments?
This is what was presented last time.
No,
This
was should have been in your packet.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that, in many cases, people that were there today didn't really have connection with the lie. That was probably one thing that stuck out.
Right.
The numbers of people on the council and the awards was also kind of probably a little unusual with the 2 per award.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the ones that we reps were D.
But again, these were, cities that had adopted a long time ago cases. 1906 was the earliest I found. Yeah. That's
Wow.
kind of amazing. And I'm talking to people that, well, I've only been here 5 years, or I've only been here since November, so don't ask me why. That's the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
But most of them seem to be satisfied with the way things were going, right? Yeah, I don't know if it's appropriate now to get into any significant discussion with it. But the 2 things that stuck out to me, well, 3 things. One, there are an awful lot of really good public servants out there that are willing to help even people like me who are just calling cold or emailing cold and setting up meetings and phone calls and stuff like that. 2 is that the only time there was ever, whenever I was talking to somebody about elections and staggered elections, and we'll get into that with the council, I think, was the only time it was ever an issue was when an incumbent chose not to be run for re-election. And then there were a lot of people that were interested, which is different. Other than that, there were almost, almost all of the incumbents got re-elected unopposed. So I found that interesting. And then I was kind of surprised at a couple of them. And I think one, I'd have to go back and read my notes, but I think one was East Grand Forks and the other was Kirsten, I think. I don't remember where the mayor only voted in the case of the tie. And that was explained to me that they wanted to have a weak mayor system. And that the mayor, he had veto power, but only voted in the case of a tie, which in cities that size I thought was kind of cool. So other than that, it was just kind of, okay, that's the way we've always done it, and it's worked for us, and we're going to stick with it. So
The veto power, I'm assuming that the council would take 0 on something and veto it, then the veto. They could override.
Yeah, they had to vote again. Yeah, 70, in one case, it was 70% was required to override the veto. But yeah, if it was, it was 8-0 and he vetoed it, that would be kind of like drinking decaf coffee, it's like, why bother, you know, it's.
There was one that I found kind of interesting, that it said, to run for mayor, you have to be on the council for at least a year.
Yeah.
That was
Kind of weird,
I was not sure if that's even legal.
Right, I know that, yeah, the Constitution sets out the qualifications to run for office, so I don't know. I don't think
it was in our charter when they first set it up, I guess.
Well,
You know, the issue is probably that no one has ever challenged.
yeah,
Right,
so it stands.
so,
You know, one thing I did notice that for me was just kind of fact was I didn't see any details from any of the cities of, did they have to redraw district lines?
yeah, I didn't put that in because that's required of each city every 10 years.
So they do it no matter
They're
what.
required to do it every 10 years, depending on your census, and several of them mentioned it,
Okay.
that they do it, and nobody, you know, and so it's like, yeah, we've got to do it every 10 years, that's what's required by state statute. And I didn't include the state statute that kind of governs all of this. So, yeah, they do, they know they gotta do it, and, you know, a couple of blocks here and a couple of blocks there and stuff like that.
Yeah, a lot of these though were rural centers and, you know, you could say East Grand Forks, you could be a suburb of Grand Forks to some degree, but most of them probably had development that occurred symmetrically in the communities. So, you know, it's unlike the metro area here where we see development going from urban to rural across the cities as we develop. And so we're a little unique in that here.
In our case, east to west, you know.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, but most of these cities could develop in any direction. So chances are they haven't really had a good issue.
Detroit Lakes had an issue, as it says there, they started looking at this in 1959 and it was 82 before they finally got around to doing it, and that was because people would come, visit, spend the summer, and then go home. And as more people decided to come, visit, and stay, the city grew, and they said, okay, we got to do this. And almost all of them had word maps that were available online, you could look at. But it was an every 10-year thing, which is dictated by state statute.
Did you find anything, where there were so many wards in the city and then because of the growth of the population, they actually added another ward?
No, no. Actually, I found the only one that Crookston had 8 wards at one time.
And then they moved to six.
And then they reduced it to 6. And when I was talking to the people from Crookston, it was kind of like, okay, tell me why you did that. Well, I don't know. But, you know, it was like, but 8 was too many and the cost of elections got to be too much. And so 6 worked out then.
I guess the question I have, and maybe this is a little further down the road. Once you go to a ward system, does it become the responsibility of the charter committee to start initiating boundary lines and redistricting?
So we're required to do that every 10 years per statute.
The council.
The city council.
Council has that, but I think in a case like this, where considering the reasons why we might recommend this, I think the council would probably look for some opinions from the charter commission in that regard. You know, and obviously the reasons why, for instance, we would want to make sure there's representation in the developing areas, there's representation in the rural areas, you know, and make sure that that occurs, rather than say, we're going to run every one of them east and west, and they're each going to pick up some of each.
Yeah,
Which is kind of would defeat that purpose.
so the council, if I'm reading this right, the council would initiate that process.
Well, the staff would actually end up doing the
Staff
work,
would do.
but they would probably be looking for guidance from the commission and council,
Sure.
working together on that issue. how they're gonna make that line.
But I think part of our discussion here and has been is to see if it warrants to making a recommendation to the council to consider this. And even if we made a recommendation that we think this would be a good direction to go, then the council isn't under any obligation to necessarily put up that.
I just have one follow-up question, with your activity with the other city councils.
Yeah.
Did any of them, reference or into the like hospital every 10 years for the ground funds, like $10,000?
No, we didn't get it in the cost. The only time cost came up was like in the case of Crookston, when they went from 8 wards to 6. And the staggered elections, which I guess we'll get into when we talk about city council, is that the cost of elections was becoming prohibitive. And so by staggering, then it was, Ward 1 is going to be elected in 24, and Ward 2 in 25, and Ward 3 in 26, and that kind of thing. Then it helps reduce the cost.
I mean, I'd be curious to understand what the actual cost is of redoing the fund.
It isn't too bad because a lot of it is all computer based now, so they put all the census data in the GIS and you can draw it, calculate all the block populations, that's you'll get it by block. So you can give pretty good estimate on that fairly easily, so it isn't too bad from a cost standpoint.
Right, but I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand what's not too bad, right? So from my perspective, some of it cost $3 million, but $2 million for us is a big deal, right? I'm just trying to understand. It's 50,000.
No, they got 1,000.
Couple thousand.
Yeah, I think there's staff time, and it depends on if we have the capability in-house. We're just starting to utilize GIS. We haven't done anything quite like this, so there will be some additional training potentially needed, or some work with one of our consulting firms, but
There's a lead time too, like if we make a recommendation, it would be a 2 or 4 year lead time probably with the council as well, which would allow the city to get more up to speed with some of those things.
Right, I mean, my big concern is this a massive financial. It sounds like it's not special.
It's time, and it does take time to set it up, but once it's set up, then it's, the every 10-year adjustment. And in my way of thinking, it would make sense, since we already have 3 precincts, to try to somehow morph those precincts into the same as the ward, so you're talking about the same thing, precinct and ward, because if you're gonna be voting, and there's 2 wards in the same precinct, that adds more complexity. That certainly makes you have more ballots and that sort of thing, but we probably would be able to find 3 places to vote in this community by the time that we get this implemented. Worst case scenario, we'd have to set one up in the garage or the west end of town or something like that, and that might be a little bit.
That could be a.
yeah.
Public works building, and then maybe both maybe here.
Well, currently we do have 3 precinct locations.
Yeah,
Right.
2 of them, the voting, at St. Thomas and here are so close together.
Mhm.
It would make sense that you would have, another one someplace further away.
Mhm.
People wouldn't have to travel as far.
More representative of that ward.
Yes, more representative being in the ward,
Yeah.
whatever the ward turns out to be.
Yeah, it's there's on the west side of town, it's somewhat limited. For the public workshop is not really conducive to.
It would be a stretch trying to run something and
Yeah.
then what we're trying to do with
Yeah, and especially with the when just got internet, their Comcast
Sure.
got hooked up.
Yeah.
But so, broadband out there, so I think that's a reason why we haven't looked, out there. With the number of folks coming into town, there might be some looking at a 4th precinct before too long, depending on population wise and our ability to host folks here at City Hall.
Do you think this is gonna coincide with our population getting closer to 10,000?
That certainly, we are at the, believe, 74.
I don't think actually.
7,400.
Yeah, and if we're talking 3 to 4 years for the council,
Right,
we're gonna be there.
yeah,
The wards by law all have to be equal in population.
Right,
Within,
yeah. but-
Five-
and-
five
and-
percent.
Yeah, within 5%.
Right, and
Precincts do not.
right, and I understand not splitting out like strips, right, it's 12 strips on, that doesn't make sense, right? You know, national geographic boundaries, work boundaries.
Well, for equity and population, yeah, I think that makes perfect. sense. Because you look at where development is going on in Corcoran. East to west strips, one north, one center, one south is probably right now, if we just took it at raw, raw numbers, is probably the best fit for equal population and equal geographic distribution.
But it would not guarantee that you have representation from rural.
Well,
Because you could have concentration of all rural or all urban in that mix.
and the recruitment of, the development of good candidates to run for public office would then be a big issue, and as is mentioned, it's somebody's gonna need to step up something.
I guess I actually, I know we were actually discussing this before, so it sounds like we moved on from that. We're getting kind of favorites.
I think we're just hitting it from a lot of different angles.
Okay, so I mean, maybe one question for me, and I think not the last question, before that. I kind of asked like, we just see what I'm not necessarily the business of that, like an example of a work map of that actually look like.
Sure.
Instead of kind of match it up to the precincts, right, but then there might be some shift, but I should be kind of curious just to see like.
Where
this is what you're doing.
I
I can
find
pull up
stuff
the
that was
precinct
online
map.
and send them to Jessica. and she can-
Yeah, and I can pull up,
Just take-
I can pull up our precinct map if you give me just a moment, so we can look at that so I have helped with the precinct setup in 2020, when we went from 2 to 3. And, we try to keep it geographical, try to go along roads to make, because when you split properties and things like that, it can be, difficult. Give me just a
Were the
moment.
3 precincts fairly consistent in the same in population?
Yes, I was trying to work with the information we knew at the time of what was being platted. To try to, with the information we had coming in. Now, things have changed since then. We had. In 2022, we had 196 new home permits. And we're at a 2.8. Population per home, so we're well exceeding our 70, or we will be at some point exceeding our 70. For
Nobody is in the bus.
One way to do it would be somewhat akin to what you're talking about, is to put a strip on the west side, north and south, and then the other 3 running east and west. Right, and that would also, you'd have 4 of them. That would work. Then you wouldn't have that much.
With the exception of population distribution.
Over time, it would change, but initially what you'd probably have is a very large geographic center in the west. And then 3 smaller ones on the east. And as time went on, what would happen is that that would shift a little bit.
Yeah, it would move further west as the 3 east move.
Well, depending on whether there's development at all in the west. If there's not, the lines could move east.
Yes.
Right, because the population in the.
Yeah.
It's denser.
so this is
Yeah.
our current,
Keep that, right.
You could probably almost have everything from Kane Road west
Right,
in a precinct.
right.
And then you'd have everything else in. You'd have
It'd
your
be
populations
interesting to
and
see
thing
what,
to look at.
it'd be interesting to take the line from Kane Road north to south
Yeah,
and see what is the population to the west of Kane Road. With the water tower and the water treatment plant being operational by next fall. So that's going to contribute significantly to development in the northeast. quadrant.
I mean, one of the other things we're doing, and I don't. Right.
Well, they're dispersed right now, and I mean, we have the mayor and one other council member down in the southeast, but the others are dispersed.
Well, I guess, right, and that would be my question, right? Whatever, I guess, any of its configurations, or whether it's say this example or the strip, north, south, and three, would any of those configurations support the current city council as it sits? I guess would be my question, right? Because,
What do you mean support?
I mean, could they still run for their seat? If we went like to a board system, would they now no longer be able to run because they're not in a war, or they have to run against each other and then be versus?
That possibility happens all the time.
Yeah,
They-
correct.
Depending on that, they get paired, and I
Right.
see that in the state all the time.
So that, I guess that's my question, is that something we would want to support that, or do we want?
Well, I think it's a reason right now not to get too anxious about rushing things too much, because right now, we get volunteers. And we have enough people interested in running, to have volunteers. One of the risks you have is if you start to divide it down into wards, and you might have a hard time in one of those wards, to find somebody.
But that's kind of one question, is right, if you let's say you go to a strip, maybe there's nobody that's really showing interest.
There probably would be.
That's a big concern of mine, and if we're saying right now that our system is supporting, I mean, right now, we are already selecting the first candidate, and it's not like we have a history of one area being heavily weighted, or I don't know. Not representing everybody, but like, you actually are reducing your choice and your quality of candidate, I feel like, or you have the potential, serious potential to do that by going to the work system in a lower population.
There was a time a few years ago when we had three concentrated down southeast, but one of them had to leave town and then somebody else was appointed. And that started the process of dispersing.
Mhm.
So,
I do feel like that happens sometimes in Corcoran, because I know like city council members like kind of like bump themselves. And that happened in a couple of elections where they were like, vote for all three of us, and that tends to maybe potentially concentrate, certain.
that has more to do with ideology than it does where they live.
Right, I know, but I'm saying like, that's giving you the kind of council like ideology represents a certain portion of the city or a certain interest of the city, whether you live on the east and the west side, so it's. I don't understand how a ward system is really going to benefit our city and people who live in it. If we are potentially having a hard time finding qualified candidates in every ward. Or even having- That was one of the cons that East Grand Fork said that counselors usually run unopposed. And this is not giving you necessarily good quality representation.
The demographics of the different cities are gonna somewhat dictate that. And I think in Corcoran, you have across the city as a whole, people that are fairly well educated, particularly people who've been in the last 30 years. People who are not well educated, who don't have good jobs, can't afford to live there, okay? So with that, you get a lot of qualified people. The issue is, are they interested in spending their time serving the community? So I don't think it's an issue of finding qualified candidates. I think it's an issue of finding candidates, period.
By qualified, I mean like good quality, including, are they willing to really commit the time and effort into doing a good job to represent the constituents?
I think with the city the size of Corcoran's land mass, campaigning and trying to hit population number 36 square miles or 33 square miles or however many it is. So, well, not quite, a little shy because of John Am.
Yeah.
And so Maple Grove that comes in, but close to 36 square miles of, of area that you're trying to cover, so. It takes a lot of time to go out and door knock that if you're really serious about doing that.
That's
Just
one of
because
the,
somebody lives in my quadrant doesn't mean I'm their like gonna be the best candidate necessarily
Right.
for me, like, I might prefer a candidate that lives in a different water.
But if you're a candidate and you want to get your message out to people. And you want to do it without being beholden to a couple of large kingmakers, if you will, in the community, and that sometimes can happen. You know, the cost of making just a direct mail to everybody in the city, as the city gets larger, becomes a big issue. The expense of running for an office in Corcoran right now is not that different from running for a state legislature. If you're going to do it right, if you're gonna do it with multiple contacts to the people, do door knocking, and maybe get a committee together and everything else. Now, we're talking about, you know, legislators at least get a salary. The folks here get maybe what, a couple $100 a month, 300 maybe?
305.
So I mean,
And then
it's not like they're
385.
doing it because they're gonna make any money at it. So they could very, very easily right now, in a 4-year term, spend 10 times the amount that they'll take in that salary over the 4-year period. And if they, and the only way they can really do that right now is to get donors, unless they're independently wealthy and can fund themselves. And not a lot of people want to spend their money on politicking. You know, they'd be happy to serve, but they're not going to go out and write a $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 check to their campaign committee to make sure they contact everybody in their precinct or even in the city as a whole. The precinct makes it a little more manageable.
I think at the end of the day, the reason there's been a lot of discussion, not just within our group, but with other cities, is there are different opinions and I think for us, when we initiated this conversation starting in 2018. And I think Ravinia was just really starting to get some momentum in terms of being developed. And Bellwether similarly at that time. And the idea was what happens 10 or 15 years from now. And so the Charter Commission was really forward looking in trying to say what would happen to the people who for the next 40 years will live in a rural area of Corcoran that really won't be developed. The Meats Line, my friend is there. And so their whole ideology could be significantly different than someone else who just moved here from another suburb, wants to get in a little bit further outer ring, but they're in a development that has 3 homes per acre. And so that was really the intention and motive of starting to get discussion on it. Commissioner Tucker really brought more information to the table with his research and so forth. I think that there's always going to be a pro and con on all of this stuff. At the end of the day, I think what I'm seeing in Cork, and I've lived here for over 25 years now, and what I've seen with the influx of the development, and we're just on the cusp of it, because once this water system happens and another one in the south happens, it's going to become much higher density, especially with multifamily units and stuff like that. I do think that I don't think we're going to have a vacuum of qualified people that would run for office. I really don't think. But I think also one of the things that jumped out at me in the research was how all these towns, the cities with ward systems had 2 reps per ward, which meant their councils were a minimum of 7 to 10, maybe 11 or 12 people on their council. And our perspective has always been, how do we do this and keep our council at 4 and mayor, no more than 5. So I do think that if you have a council of 10, you might have shine in trying to get some qualified people. But if we keep our council at 5, then I think we're going to always have a good pool of really qualified candidates to go. You know, I think at least it increases the probability.
I mean, you think that there will be multiple people running in each board for each?
There would probably be if it's feasible to do it, but if they're gonna be spending $15,000 to $20,000, nobody's gonna challenge it. Why would they?
But every city has their own philosophy, you got St. Michael that has 20,000 people and they're all voted at large. I mean, they're, so.
Which we really haven't talked about at large.
Right.
And which is what we have now.
Yeah,
If there were a better way to inform the public about people that are running for office rather than moving everybody to their own devices and having to spend their own dime. You probably would get a better result. I think if you have a newspaper that's has good coverage in your community, which we don't. Corcoran News doesn't have very good subscription ratings out here. You know, they do have the Wright County paper over on the other side. Buffalo has a paper, and I don't know how well.
but I think newspapers are also kind of dying.
They're dying. So basically, what you're left with is what kind of online communication can you do? And if you're going to do that, that's going to be time and money to do that.
I feel like people are informed as they want to be in this day and age, so like. I mean, we have these big national elections where people have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend. That doesn't mean that like everybody knows everything about the candidates that they're choosing between. So I don't feel like that. I mean, I understand what you're saying. A lot of people feel like I can't even afford to run for office even if I qualify.
Well, in other words, somebody could actually come into a ballot, see 3 people on the ballot, and go down the list. And they look at the ethnicity of the person's last name, and that's maybe their decision.
Sure. Exactly.
Which is terrible, but I mean, that's what you could be looking at.
Yeah.
And that happens, whether it's a board that.
Right, that
So,
happens no matter what.
That's the first thing, I mean, people will be biased against them.
Yeah.
You know, general religions,
Yeah.
different. Political.
Jessica, do we know the population in each of the 3 precincts?
Well, I can tell you what it was at the time I did this in 2020.
So one, I guess maybe one question I have for the voting system. Okay, so let's just take them through the votes and say, oh, we have to do that. A person in the rural area, their property, pretty much 20 years. Their city council member gets elected, but they don't necessarily want that person, believe that person aligns with it, at least whatever, I mean, it doesn't matter what it's pretty fresh. But they have a problem, and so they go to that person, and maybe they don't really for the knowledge or whatever they're looking for. Right? The escalation path for them at that point is what?
You know, it can go to the mayor.
Okay.
They can also go to other council members because the council members, all of them, no matter whether they're elected from their precinct or not, are representing the city as a whole. They vote for issues of the city as a whole. So all of their email addresses are published. You can make contact that way. You can give them a call. There's all kinds of ways to go around your person, so to speak.
But again, this is where maybe right, so we talk about the campaign, the city council, if you do that, right, they spend their money in time. So we're saying, in other words, it's like spend your money time here, right? But then when you are a city council member, you don't have so much time, and instead of you folks kind of constituents, and that's where the constituents in your ward don't give time to this person over here because they're not happy with the council.
You would probably end up giving your time to whoever gets in touch with you,
Sure.
whether it's somebody that lives within your ward or not.
Well, I guess what we're trying to understand, because then by that position, we kind of saying that the board system is not. Because we're saying the city council members act at large, and that's kind of what's kind of, but then during the campaign, we're saying, oh, you focus here. So I just feel like there's just.
In certain circumstances, like, you know, East Grand Forks is one that stuck out because I talked with them. they kept talking about, well, when we had flooding, everybody knows Red River flood. When the red floods, then the first person there is supposed to contact is their local council person. And then if there's an at-large person in the city, contact them and or the mayor. And, a lot of that also depends on how you write up this is gonna have to be an amendment to the charter, which is gonna have to be approved by council, and be voted on by the citizenry. So, this is a process. And how it's written up will make a big difference on that kind of thing. To say, if this is your council person, yeah, that's your first line of contact. But there are other ways to get information if you need it. And I don't see us having a lot of those,
Yeah, I mean, hopefully,
like flooding issues and.
hopefully we don't have a lot of problems.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't want any problems, like that's the point.
The primary issues that people are concerned about in the community right now have to do with property rights, and whatever we can do, it can't be on the property. And that's, you look at the planning commission, agenda, which is a pretty large agenda these days. That's where the action is. And so, in certain parts of the community, you're going to have more action because of the development that's going on, what's going on next week. But if you go into the rural areas, like there's one coming this week from one of my neighbors. I happen to read the agenda. And he's coming because he wants to build his barn with 1 foot overhangs instead of 2 foot overhangs. And he's got more barn than what will fit on his lot, so they wanted to combine lots. And he's looking at, gee, I got all this paperwork and it's costing me $10,000 of paperwork before I get to a $40,000 project. So, that's the kind of thing that people are interested in and why they might want to talk to the council member or the council as a whole to say, hey, give me some relief.
But they can do that in our current.
Yes, absolutely they can. But they may or may not have anybody on the council who lives in a circumstance that's similar, that can truly, appreciate what they're saying, because many of the others might live 3 to an acre and not have that perspective.
So I did pull up the detail from the election results and last year. So we've had about 1,500 in precinct 1, 1,500 in precinct 2, and 1,736 in precinct 3. As registered voters as of 7 a.m. We did have election day that's how many people were registered as the first line. And then election day registrations, and then voting wise, we had a very similar group of people, numbers of people in the precinct.
Yeah.
When I first did, we didn't have our updated numbers from the last census, so what we had to work off of was 2010. And so, because knowing the growth that we had platted in certain lots that we had platted, precinct, suggested we make precinct 3 and precinct 2 slightly large or slightly smaller in population to begin with, as we knew that the population for
Was precinct 1 percentage of voter turnout?
Yeah.
See, what you're dealing with there is one term.
Yeah, and precinct 2, we had, so the total number of people voting is on the far right hand side there,
It was
very similar. A lot of people turning out.
I mean, that's kind of interesting because, we're talking about a board system to ensure that those people are represented, that they are shown. Already, right, and they're having a voice over not a single city council member, but all 4 in America.
I feel like all the data is showing that the system they're currently using is working for our city. And for the right years. I mean, I don't know how far out until you would maybe feel like it's not working, but development's gonna continue happening all over the city.
Well, that's actually not true. development's not gonna happen all
Not
over
at
the
the same
state in the same density.
right, not the same thing.
So you have to take,
In general, Corcoran.
yeah, but the majority of the growth is on the east.
So, yeah,
There's gonna be a lot of cornfields on the west, for a long time.
For a long
I'm all for it. There's
The-
a line with the-
The Musa line generally follows just outside of 116 here, down here, and over. What that means is our growth is gonna be concentrated down along south here and along the east, because there's not access to sewer and water.
And I think the south has some limitations of sewer access.
And there are limitations on sewer access. Until we build a pipe from south to north, we are going to be limited on sewer access.
That's been, why there's not more development. 55.
I mean,
That doesn't say much for just a dispersed county. If that's where your growth is gonna be, and that's where your people are gonna show up and vote, that doesn't say a whole lot for a dispersed county.
So,
Explain yourself.
Yeah.
Well, maybe,
I'm not.
I agree with Megan. People can be as informed as they want, and if they choose not to be informed, they won't be. And I happen to be an informed voter. And I think that if you're saying that where the Musa line is, which, you know, is a whole separate thing, and should we vote, should we elect Met Council people, yada, yada, yada. If the growth is gonna be south and east, okay? If that's where your growth is gonna be, then, you know, I know Bottom lives way up north, I know Barrington lives out, off of 10, you know, and I don't know where Schultz lives.
no,
I think it's off of. Is he
He's off of Hunter.
Hunter. Someplace?
he's up of Hunter,
Hunter?
so in the south,
so
I can't,
if all your growth is gonna be, in the south and the east, a dispersed council does not necessarily help those people in the south and east, which is gonna be the majority of your voters within the next 7 years. Then I don't know. I agree with what Megan said. The system seems to be working now, but
if you go back to your table, right, the people that actually voted, right, the percentage, you know, that is very interesting. I almost feel like maybe that's secondary component, right? If the people in our ruler, where I think, you know, a lot of this, I mean, right, I'm making sure that that one votes, right? If they're showing up, right, they're voting at a much higher percentage. To be honest, in the back of my brain, I'm from a campaign perspective. Yeah, maybe it's a lot of watching, right, that's not hurting. But I would rather go hit up, you know, in that precinct, because I know that they show up, because that, the ROI is not
Right.
to the very top.
Do you realize how much effort it would take somebody?
I do, I understand, 28 parcels, I understand.
I'm just talking about the numbers also.
Yeah, I understand the top. But what I'm trying to say is maybe if these percentages, like, I would effectively say that, like, as we've never, other percentages effectively maintain themselves. Then I would say the system's probably working, but I would say, if anyone becomes outside, that would be carrying the whole on for us to say, okay, we now come and we're seeing a problem, right? We don't have to wait for a census, right? Let's kick off the system back. But I think maybe this type of data, what we do is to say yea or nay, like the brackets for it. That's actually meaningful, that truly.
it's interesting. The state only allows us to think about where population is, not how they vote.
And right, I'm not saying how they vote, right? I'm saying that those people are showing up to representing themselves.
Right.
So I'm saying if all of a sudden, let's say, you know, precinct 3, all of a sudden, you know, goes from 60% turnout to 20. Oh, okay, we've got a fundamental problem here. Okay, there's something going on. Maybe we need to evaluate this, right? The canary in the coal mine methodology, right? There's a problem. Is that problem? We don't have a way to do that.
Let me ask this question. What would be the problem that should trigger considering the work. Well, maybe it's something we should ponder. And again, I think that, and by the way, I appreciate all the dialogue and feedback, this is really good. I do think that the intention is not to ramrod something through quickly. I think considering the mayoral term is a much higher priority than the ward system at the present time. But give the water system 3 years to be operational and see what that does in the northeast quadrant in terms of development. Give another kick or boost with the second water system in the southeast area, and what that will be, because we're buying water from maybe road right now, that would change. And what would that actually mean if the Corcoran grew to 10, 11, 12,000 people? What effect would that have upon the people, again, who are living in the western part of the city? And could there become a voting bloc that has specific agendas that doesn't consider that? And that was the ultimate reason why the discussion came up in the first place. And so I don't know that we're ready to pull the trigger on this, but I do think that instead of looking at what is working, which the system has been working, I think I'd like to just put it out there for the all commissioners to ponder, and that is what problems could occur that would warrant this moving in this direction. And maybe look at that to see if those problems start to raise their ugly head, then maybe it's time to truly consider doing something like that.
I'll submit one. And that's traffic management. I live in Bass Lake Crossing, you try and make a left turn out of Bass Lake Crossing somewhere between 4 and 6 o'clock. You might as well turn right, go down to 116 and go down to 55 if that's the way you want to go. I think traffic management could conceivably be an issue on the south side, on the east side, where people can't get to where they want to go because of the density. I've had some of my neighbors ask me, if they know I'm on the charter commission, well, when are they going to put a stoplight at Brockton Lake? It ain't happening.
Yeah, and that has to do with the EAW and all that other stuff.
Right, I know that, and it's a county issue and, all that kind of thing. But it's, I think traffic management for these people. I also think that potentially, if you went back to the old map and you look at, we, as we talked about at our last meeting, we support 5 school districts. And
Rogers.
well, okay, and people may want to live in a certain district, and not in another one. And all of a sudden, it's like, so what are we doing to make sure that I can get my kids into the school zone? So traffic management and educational access to things are issues.
In case like carry that a little further, let's say all of your council members are in rural areas. None of them had to worry about making left hand turn on to 10, right? And they didn't want to raise taxes to pay for your problem. That is the kind of thing that would trigger people in your community to say, hey, we need to be here, we get a representative, right? It's council, right? Right now, I don't think we deal with that because I think our council is using whatever resources they can get to solve whatever problems come in front of them. So we don't have that issue. I think what we're thinking about is what could happen, what could go wrong. Another thing that can go wrong in a community is you get a coalition developed, as you talked about earlier, that's funded by people with special interests. And you as a citizen wouldn't have any clues to where that funding's coming from until long after the election's over. If you're interested in pulling up a report, assuming that they give one that time manner. So you wouldn't know that 3 of the people or 4 of the people that you voted for are all funded by a particular interest group that is driving a particular development. You wouldn't know that.
I mean, they're
It
not gonna.
would, but it's not as likely to happen that
More likely to happen with the state legislature
I'm gonna say, I would,
or
I'd venture to say it's not very likely. to sit
in a city council.
I would
Yeah.
say it's very, very likely
That-
that the fire action. I mean, you know, we don't have any examples of that in real life, right?
Well, obviously Hennepin County disperses their money equally to all areas without any concern.
Right.
And all of the new sales tax is gonna be dispersed to Corcoran to deal with your attorney.
So one thing that I think you mentioned.
Yeah.
Is, you know, you talk about uploading, right? And when, you know, you ask, you know, one thing, so, and then, so in the back of my brain, I think it's not so much the city council members voting. It is more about, is there a voting block, right, that are influenced, because they're gonna be influenced either by special interests or individuals, or that doesn't really matter, that's the whole point of campaigning.
Right.
Right? But for me, like, again, I go back to those numbers, the percentages of people that are voting. I don't care how somebody else votes, I don't care if the neighbor votes my way, or somebody in the area votes their way. I care that people vote. But if we basically said all of a sudden, one of these precincts have this massive shift up, down, and there. That to me, again, is the voting block aspect. I feel like that's the actual concern.
Yeah.
Right, it's the voting block itself. And if we're not seeing that, maybe that's how we maybe people this and say. We would evaluate the voting numbers on an annualized basis, and if we are seeing irregularities, that should then kick off the board discussion.
As Brian indicated, this is not an urgent issue.
Right, right.
And I think we're discussing it because we're trying to come up with what is the logic behind it or not behind it. Quite frankly, I don't have a problem with slow walking the wards.
Yeah.
But I think if we actually monitor, right, if you create a metric, something that we would monitor, like, let's say that's, let's say something else, and maybe it's, who knows what, right? Maybe it's reviewing funds spent on campaigns, right, we can document, so they have to file with them, right?
Well, you know, that's an after the fact thing.
Sure, all of it would be after the fact, so the idea would be if we see something that is saying, hey, this is shifting, because it's not gonna be a loving shift, right? It's gonna be how we go about, right, like, waters, you know, right, well.
It can happen very quickly. It happened in Corcoran here in the early, around 2000, something like that. We had just to give you a little history, most of you folks weren't around at the time. We had a situation where the gentleman was attempting to develop a cooperative sewer arrangement. And his idea for development only, basically what we wanted to do was develop a captive system in downtown Corcoran as a kind of a pilot project and keep the metro sewer out of it. In other words, not be attached to Maple Grove or anything else. And so there were some other issues that he had, one of which was that he had this so-called group that took over ownership of people's private septic systems. And he actually went in and did an engineered solution on somebody's septic system in the south part of the community that was unauthorized without any input from building inspectors or anybody else. He just did it. The city fined him on it. This actually went all the way to the Supreme Court of the state. The city won all the way through. But what he did was a couple days before the election, sent out poison pen letters, got himself and another guy elected. And at the next election cycle, they did the same thing, got one more elected, so they now had a majority. They fired just about everybody on the staff. They hired their own cronies. They hired one of their cronies to be the city engineer, city planner.
It wasn't the vote in 3 years that was unanimous on it.
No,
It was all three.
Ken Gutzner would happen to be on the council at the time, and he was the minority at that point in time because he wasn't able to control it. And what they did was basically they took the city to a point where it could not balance its own checkbook. Okay, that's how bad it got. They fired the administrator, they fired the planner, they fired the city engineers. They fired the city attorney. They did retribution, every person who had been involved in that litigation all the way through, got rid of them all.
What was the charter commission?
Charter Commission was silent on it. They were the ones, that group was the ones that initiated the Charter Commission in '92. That same individual was involved. Okay? Charter Commission didn't do a thing. It was only a couple of years later when the public became aware of all these problems. People were coming in with applications under the planning. And they would not even get them done in the 60-day statutory time period, so they automatically were approved. And they did selective approvals. Their buddies got special deals. This is what happens in a community if you can get you've got 5 members of the council, you get 3 of them on there that are road. We had a road council during that period. The next 2-year election, we took care of it. We got rid of it. But that was, then you have the whole process of rebuilding all of your systems, your whole budget system, your finance system, everything, everything has to start from scratch.
And I understand that, and I would maybe say, the charter commission is a different place than it was.
Oh, yeah.
And, we're more the oversight to prevent that. I guess. In theory. Right?
In theory, that's what,
That's a little bit more history, actually, who was the mayor, actually, went on the charter commission. And I think it was at that time, George, you and I, the charter, and I think Jim, you might have been, you were there. And we actually rewrote the charter, cleaned it all up, made it a lot more effective document, because it was a pretty archaic document. And, but a lot of that came as a result of this, catastrophe, that happened. And again, we're not predicting that same level of catastrophe is on the horizon. I think again, our motivation, our intention is we see something happening in terms of development that's happening, that's really changing the dynamic and of what Corcoran has been for many years, many decades. And we want to be forward thinking to make sure everybody has a voice at the table. That's what we're really trying to do. I don't think personally that now is the time to pull the trigger on this, but I think it's having these kind of discussions that will really, if the time comes, we will have really vetted this concept thoroughly.
But see, yeah, but that's exactly what I'm saying. I agree with you. I don't think we should pull the trigger now, but I think we should figure out what those warning signals are, where it's not just, well, I don't like this guy, right? Like, maybe it's this, maybe it's something else, but maybe we should figure out what those warning signals are, so we do need that. And the government hasn't seen any of that. I would love to be able to get in front of it as much as we can if we're saying we see a potential problem downstream.
That's why I posed the question. What really are the problems that award system would avoid if we had it? And if we can't really answer that, then we're not really ready to move forward. But I would ask all of you to give some thought, because you're all going to be on the commission. Well, hopefully you'll be on here after next year. Right? No. I didn't say that. But you're up in 2024, but the rest of us are on longer. And so, we'll be here, this commission will be in existence pretty much as it is for the next 3 years. So we'll have ample time to have a conversation about this and look for some of these triggers that might need to, thresholds that might need to consider.
I do think that there might be Yeah, but always not, you know, I just read it, and for some reason I just see that, it's large, it's kind of that. Well, you know, the church, I just hope you know, because the vote happened.
That can happen in any situation, whether you're boards or not. because
Right.
you know, I know people
That's
across the entire city,
Mhm.
and I could reach out to those folks in different boards and say, hey, let's run as a team.
Especially with there's no, right, but I'm talking about turnout, like, if all of a sudden, the turnout in one area just skyrockets, because I'm no reason. You know, something to look at, or we look at campaign finance, and all of a sudden, everybody's saying, sell out, and then all of a sudden, everybody's saying, I'm not.
Campaign financing is probably a good trick. That I would agree with, that would be an issue.
Yeah, and I'm not saying maybe those are, you know, I'm just saying, we should think about what the are, you know, again, thinking about what the problems are, solved, but what are the triggers that would say, let's really focus on this now, because now it's right, before we get, you know, 2 or 3 quarters down the line, say, oh, I get sure. There has to be really one.
We should probably discuss the mayor.
Yeah,
Because part of the reason we wanted to bring that up on the agenda now is because we talked about it before. I think there was at least some degree of consensus, but we never really voted on it.
Jessica, I have one more question.
Yes.
People like this kind of data for each local election.
We do, this is the information that we get from Hennepin County, for the canvassing of election results. So after every election, after every city election, which would be the November election, we do additional voting for the 2 primaries that will be happening next year, but in November, we'll have this within 10 days of the election.
What do you think is recent?
We'd have that, this information at, you have to certify election results within 10 days of the election, so we'd be able to, if we wanted to hold a meeting in November following the election, we could look at that.
When was the fine? So, when the campaign
Campaign finance reports, there are multiple during the year, the
30 days
election, but within
after
30
you
days.
Get the final in 30 days after the election, but you get one 10 days before the election and then.
Well, right, I'm saying, so maybe, you know, we'll get information about those days before we have our meeting.
So December, likely.
Yeah, I mean, we could,
And you could start with those, go from there.
Yeah.
You might have something else.
most of that data is online, so.
Yeah.
It's possible that you know.
We're required, the city's required to post, finance, campaign finance, you know.
Sure, but I'm saying from the perspective of how we do the vote, it's very different. So I think what we're going to put after is, hey, the tax information, let's establish how we got. You know, that is upon, you know, like it's triggered. I think it was triggered in terms of lots. But
So regarding the award discussion, would you all be in favor of basically tabling this and gather more information? And if all of you could come back with, the canary.
I'll make a motion to table the, discussion.
Motion by Dr. and seconded by so very favor. Okay, thank you for that discussion, and let's proceed on to the discussion about the mayoral term. Again, part of what was at the heart of the kind of intertwined here a little bit, but we'd like to have some discussion to bring the recommendation to the council as to whether or not we feel the mayoral term to be a 4-year term rather than a 2-year term. Partly because of the cost of campaign for launch, as well as the continuity over time, especially for where we are at today, with all of the development that has happened. Open everything up to any discussion,
I've been in city administration for over 20 years, and every mayor that I know of
just barely gets their feet wet after 2 years. So it's really hard to go and be a mayor and learn in that first 2 years and then have to go and face voters again, so. I think, and then from a staff standpoint, to have a majority of the council turn over, potentially turn over every 2 years. By switching all 3 members, really hurts with continuity and having the city go in a consistent direction versus zigzagging. So I think for those reasons, I'm totally supportive of moving to a 4-year term.
I would concur with those comments because your first 2 years are really, especially if you haven't served on the council before. That's why that one that requires them to be on council kind of interesting. I think we always thought that it was good for council members to serve on planning commission, first, but that's kind of a wish list thing, not a mandate. So, I think a 4-year term would be appropriate. Quite frankly, it's kind of awkward for the mayor or even council to bring that forward without members of the public initiating it. I think we are probably the body that correctly should be initiating this and taking it to the council as a recommendation. I think if they get it, they're probably going to go.
I mean, I agree.
The campaigning.
Well, yeah, the actual finding. I think that, from that perspective. And then again, so you work around 4 years is generally, not just the ones but in general.
Yeah, it's normal. I mean, there's some cities that have 2-year mayor terms that, that I worked in, we had 2 years. In Dallas when I was there, it created a lot of stress because the mayor was thinking more short term versus long term. And so that stability and continuity and thinking more long term, I think is more beneficial for the city, especially in a growing city.
And to the question, under state statute, for statutory cities, it's a 2-year term unless outlined, but it's a 4-year term. So it's common in Minnesota, but there are many cities who have gone to the 4 years.
I just got brothers, be the mayor of Beaver Bay, the population is pretty small up there, but he moved there as a retirement place and got involved in city council and pretty soon found out that they wanted to be mayor. So he was appointed the first time around, but somebody else left town. And then ran for re-election. As soon as he got elected, the rest of the council said, "Hey, this is going to be the 4-year term." They changed the rules. So he's stuck for 4 years. But that is the issue. I mean, in a small town like that, you need somebody that has continuity, has the ability, and you only maybe have 150 people in town and half of them go to Texas. You need somebody that's gonna, step up to the plate and finding those people is hard.
No, I think as the mayor, not the full kind of position and stuff like that. It's a disaster. All of that. Might be right.
I think you give more stability, personally.
And you're also letting that person stay involved in city process rather than think the last 6 months of their term that they're going to be campaigning. I mean, their head is going to be in the right place. They're not worried about being elected.
Any other comments?
What's the appropriate motion for this?
Well, I asked the city attorney today to just follow up on what his recommended practice would be, and so that's what I put up on the screen. So there's a variety of different paths that we can do to get there. The one that allows us to not do it with a referendum would mean that the charter commission must recommend to the city council that they amend the charter by ordinance. The council then needs to publish a notice of a public hearing within 1 month of receiving the receipt of that. And then the public hearing must be 2 weeks, but not more than a month after the notice. And within 1 month of the notice, the charter commission or the charter amendment must be voted upon. And then
The problem is we don't have language to give the council.
we do not at this moment, so we could,
So I guess the motion would
Draft.
be to request the city attorney to draft language for this charter amendment for adoption, potential adoption at the September annual meeting.
I think the first step would be to take the concept to the council. Conceptually, pass it and they support it. And at the same time, we could be preparing that. Exactly.
Yeah, I don't think that's gonna take much time to do.
No, really, I think in terms of having that prepared, that can be prepared in advance of the notice going. Because I think you would want it to be prepared before the notice is published.
From a company perspective. We have presidential elections. Yeah, well, yeah.
I think this could be implemented as a.
Would we want the mayor? 4 year term on presidential elections, would be staggered. For that drive turnout. Is high for the presidential elections.
I know in this community, I don't think it matters, so.
we have really good
A lot
turnout.
of them. I think in Hanover and where I used to work and then Springley Park, they of course correspond with the governor's term, but that is not any statutory requirement. Any election cycle.
Why, we get high turnout here.
Had it in the 80s every year I've done it.
So what really it comes down to is. We need to know if the council is unanimous on this, then we can make it effective for the 2024 election because we can get it adopted and approved. But if not, then and we decide to take it to a vote of the people, it wouldn't take effect until 2026 because you would have to have a vote on the question first.
So my thought is that basically, the current mayor would not have to run. Or that would pass.
I think he has to run for the 4 year term, so it doesn't automatically extend the term.
Well, the term will be up.
Right. But so his term would end,
But if this were to be approved, would that, it be implemented?
it would be implemented for 2024, so when he runs in 2024, it'd be for a 4 year term.
I mean, I don't think that. Probably not.
Does this have any effect on council races?
On council races, no, it would just change the mayoral, just term length, and so in terms
What
of
it would be though, is every other election would be 3 votes before and then the other election would be 2 weeks.
unless there's a special election, and then we've had that.
Is there a public, time for public feedback on this?
There is a required public hearing.
And
Um,
who oversees that? Is that something we oversee? Is that something?
It would be something at the council level that there is a public hearing related to it.
Because the council has to vote on.
Would there be that the hearing, the public hearing before the council vote on it?
It would be at the council meeting when they were voting on it.
So the council meeting is the public.
Yeah.
The meeting, the council meeting that they're gonna be voting on is the public. Hearing.
And they may decide
Yeah.
to hold a public hearing on meeting and then following.
Yeah, so the requirement is that the charter commission would recommend it to the council. The council then will publish the notice after, so we bring it, the charter commission would bring it to a meeting. Council would say, okay, we want to move forward with it. We'll schedule the public hearing, and then that will happen in a second.
Can you
Charter.
verify with the city attorney? What Dan was talking about?
That it would be required to start another term.
Yeah.
And when it's presented to the council from us, is that done in person? Is that just done?
It would be, it'd likely be by a letter or a staff memo that there is direction that not the charter commission, but direction that, requested it. So, so if you're comfortable, we could look at, if you want to ask them before we go ahead with the formal notice or the formal request, just to see if they'd like to do that, we could put that in an upcoming council meeting. And then tonight, direct staff to work with the city attorney to draft that notice. So instead of 2 touches with the council, it'd be 3 then. If that's what you'd like to.
So that would probably be the first. September.
We could have it the first meeting in September. I do not have it on.
We have-
Tuesday. Yeah, Thursday. Yeah. So it would be a,
Well, that would allow for us to get council feedback before our next meeting in September, so then you can decide whether or not we waste our time with it or not.
Well, yeah, the objective is bringing it forward, and getting it settled. The other is really to avoid doing it election year. You know, so you get this out of the way before the campaign.
One other question, which is not kind of related to this, but that is our next meeting. Do we want to keep that in September, or do we want to push that back a little bit to allow maybe some opportunity for feedback? Does anybody have any thoughts on it?
I think we probably scheduled.
the council meeting is the 14th. We scheduled it purposely on a Tuesday to avoid, you all wanted it not be on a night of council meeting.
Should we postpone it maybe a couple of weeks?
Would you like it to be on the night, or the 26th?
Yeah,
I think
Do you have a preference on the 19th or the 26th?
Well, if Lincoln wants 26, and nobody else is saying it. It's third voice rule.
Yeah, the 26th is fine.
It'll be a pretty short session anyway.
Yeah.
Well, no, not necessarily, because we could go and put it on a
And then
ballot
you
if
could
we
put it
felt
on the
strongly
ballot.
about it. We could have it be a question for the voters to decide.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. And the council could say, we support this, but we'd rather have the voters decide this, and that could be our direction to put it on the ballot. So
Yeah.
there's a couple of different directions to go. So I guess I would make a motion to ask the city attorney to draft language to make this, for this charter change for commission review.
And just to clarify, and also bring the idea to the.
Yeah, and to also bring the idea to the
The
council.
council at the September 14th meeting.
Do we have a motion? George, we have a motion by Daniel, and second by George Denard. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Great, thank you. Do we have any other new business that anybody wants to bring up?
Are we official on the 26th?
26th at 6 p.m. as long as you all call that.
So I'll make a motion to schedule the annual meeting for September 26th. Then, did you want 5:30 or 6?
The council of the current.
Yeah. Yeah.
Correct, yep.
6 p.m.
6 p.m. That's fine.
Yeah,
Yes.
do we have a second?
Here.
Yeah. Second of that?
I think Jim is seconding it, sure.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same? Thank you. Yeah. So that's it.
Yeah.
That's how it's done. Nobody wanted to. No.
I think I might not even have to put myself.
So does anybody have any other new business that they would like to?
I have a quick question. Is there any other issue that falls on our shoulders that we have to be considering for the next presidential election year from this November?
Charter commission, Charter commission?
Yeah. Is there anything else we need to be concerned about?
I think there was some potential conflicting language in the charter regarding elections to state law, so if there was anything, we just need to just clarify that, even though state law supersedes, we just don't want to have confusion with residents, but beyond that, I don't think there really was any.
There, our charter is pretty limited on all questions. So.
But there's specific dates in state law that you're allowed to have the election, and the charter says has different time frames than what state law is. So that's the only difference. So it could be as simple as referring to the statutory reference to the charter and leave that out too. But
That's something that we could have the city attorney look at. If that's a big question. I think I have that. Yeah, you can submit an application. I will ask when I send out. Yeah.
Yeah, so more recent commission, you did it, you did it,
no,
yeah. I had a good 15-minute conversation.
I think the change, there have been 3 or 4 different types of records.
You're the first one that said that. Yeah.
usually they just take the city council's recommendation.
Yeah, no, it was very good, very good. This is the most enjoyable part of my job. You must have a lot of bad days. Any other business? No? Okay, we have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Yeah, no. Jim, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Both same. Thank you, everybody. Again, thank you, Commissioner Tucker, for all your work. Yeah, really appreciate it. It was very, very helpful.
Well, thank you all.
And thank